Welcome, everyone, to another one of our live streams. I'm Rob Dalrymple. It's good to be with you again today. I've always felt uneasy, when Christians lament the perceived, decline of their nation. For many, it seems as though Christianity itself were somehow at risk, But when I think of the history of the church, I'm reminded that very few Christians in history have lived in free democratic societies. The gospel has never depended upon the form of government. Christianity thrived in the Roman Empire, and it flourishes today under emperors and dictators, under monarchies, democracies, and communist, socialist, and capitalist systems alike. Now, that said, of course, I'm deeply grateful. I am for the democratic privileges that we have here in the United States and the democratic freedoms. My mom loved to travel, and she passed that love on to me. And I've been privileged enough to be able to travel much of the world, teaching and worshiping alongside Christians in Nigeria, India, the Middle East, and across Central and South America. Many of them live with daily threats, whether from religious nationalism, from government hostility, or constant fear of violence. Yet in those places, I've often found a faith more vibrant and courageous than what we see in many Western churches. Danny can speak to this himself, but he spent many years ministering to Christians in communist countries. And I'm sure he can share his experience of Christians under communism and the richness of their faith. But in a democracy, our freedom actually increases our responsibility. Greater liberty means greater opportunity and greater duty to love our neighbors in a tangible way. In our series Revelation Revealed that we've been posting on the YouTube channel, we've been exploring the danger of confusing civil loyalty with the gospel itself. Many believers, I think sometimes unknowingly, just embrace forms of Christian nationalism when they insist that Christians must submit to their governing authorities without question. And Romans 13 is just always bantied about, and we discussed that in our previous episode. But Scripture calls us to something higher. Yes, we're called to be good citizens, but we're also commanded to hold our leaders accountable, especially when power is used to harm or silence others. Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. That's why we're doing this series. In our conversation on immigration, we affirm that a nation has the right to secure its borders, but when policies dehumanize people or target them because of their ethnicity, we have to speak up. So that's today's live stream. This is part 2 of our discussion on fascism. And our aim is not to promote a political party or agenda. We're asking deeper questions. Is our democratic society in America drifting toward fascism? And if so, what are the signs? And why should it matter for followers of Jesus? We don't raise these questions because democracy itself must be defended at all costs. We raise them because fascist movements consistently oppress people made in the image of God. As long as we live in a democracy, we have both the freedom and the Christian duty to defend the poor, the vulnerable, and the oppressed. So at Determined Truth, we don't endorse political parties or candidates. Our allegiance is to Christ the King and his kingdom. And this is what grounds this conversation. It's this hope that compels us forward. So what is fascism and why is it a problem for Christians? Now, before we begin to address this, let me go ahead and bring on my colleague, Danny Hall. Danny, I can't find Danny on the screen. Let me, sorry about this. Let me do it this way. There you go. Danny, there you go. Thanks for being with us, Danny.
Good to be here. Yeah.
All right. And Mako Nagasawa is also going to join us. As you remember, Mako, we've introduced him many times. Mako is the founder and executive director of the Anastasis Center. And wonderful website, wonderful resources. Mako, thank you again for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. So what I'm going to try to do here, gentlemen, if I can maybe frame the conversation to pick up from where we left off on the last occasion, is to simply say, let me kind of list what I think are maybe 10 features of fascism. Mako, you can say yes or no at the end of the day, and we'll discuss this as we go back and forth. But just so everybody has an understanding, what is fascism? So number one, fascism is the idea of authoritarian and dictatorship. Power is centralized into a single ruler or maybe a leading party. And then there's suppression of political opposition, dissent, and the free press. Okay. Secondly, there's nationalism and this mythic identity. Extreme nationalism is often characteristic of socialism and of fascism, and the idea of that one race or one culture is better than the others. The Christian nationalists in America, they exalt Christianity. The Nazis exalted the Aryans. So often there's an interesting appeal to like restoring the greatness of our society, as it might be. Third, there's a militarism. Which often has violence, the glorification of the military strength, the violence and war as a means to, and paramilitary groups or militias are often brought in to control and enforce control, which can be dangerous. Number four, there's the control of the media and the propaganda. And I think this is huge. We did this in the Revelation Revealed series. Mass propaganda, disinformation, and media manipulation to control opinion. This happens even in other in democratic societies, by the way, whether they're leaning towards fascism or not. Number 5, anti-democratic and anti-liberal. And of course, liberal means, open to all sides. It doesn't mean, people on the Democratic. That's not what it means. But identification, the idea here is, where am I? Okay, there you go. Hostility towards the democratic process, individual rights, and especially checks on power. Number 6, scapegoating and exclusion. Identification of internal and external enemies, the minorities, the immigrants, the Russians, the communists. They are who to be blamed for our national problems. Number 7, we have corporation, which I think is huge, and economic control. The state aligns with powerful corporations and elites while crushing the labor movements. Number 8, we have mass mobilization and uniformity, where citizens are mobilized into mass rallies and demonstrations in support of the fascist entity here, not in dissent, because dissent is being suppressed. Suppressing diversity of thought, culture, and religion. And then there's often an appeal to law and order. We saw that all the way back to the Nixon campaign. He ran on a template or a platform of law and order. We've seen it during Reagan's era. We've seen it, of course, at different times as well. Strong emphasis on discipline, policing, harsh punishments for dissenters. But there's often a selective fascism, of course, is like one group. That's the in group. And there's a selective enforcement of law that privileges supporters of the regime. And then finally, number 10 here. And Mako, you can comment here as we're done, but reactionary and revolutionary at once, that seeks to overthrow the current order, but in the name of returning to some identifiable past and these goals of the glorious past. So, all right, let me stop there. So let's begin.
Yeah, Mako, I'm just curious as you read that, and the first tendency anybody would have is this is a wild overreaction to what's going on in our country. So help us understand how you see how this is playing out and where the dangers are.
Thanks, Danny and Rob. I think that outline is fabulous, and the symptoms are right on point. I organized them in my PowerPoint presentation, just in a slightly different order, but I work with those symptoms. I think one of the things that would be helpful to name is why. Like, why do people get drawn into that? And we talked about that a little bit in part 1. There's like emotions of fear, disgust, and anger. I think it might also be helpful to name that, the Germany, Italy, and Japan during the period between World War I and World War II, they were feeling, a lot of the population was feeling those things, fear, disgust, and anger, because of economic anxiety and also a kind of a collective humiliation, either because they were defeated or because they felt surpassed or something like that, right? Like, and that's really important to understand and to some degree sympathize with, to say like, okay, I understand. It's also important because many of we could also talk about the post-Soviet Union Russia. I think they went through the same thing. There was a brief attempt at democracy, but the economic anxiety and the collective humiliation, I think, were really easy to exploit. But the Nazis, I think, it's really important to remember that they looked to the United States. They came to study the racial laws and patterns of segregation in Jim Crow America. And they even said, that's too extreme for us. And, that's really
the racism in America was too extreme for the racism that they wanted to impose.
Exactly.
And this is what, early 1930s then, Mako?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Nazi scientists and policymakers came to observe and understand the United States. And there's some of my slides will show the sources for that, and that's important because Jim Crow America, especially in the South, but also increasingly as we understand the West, because a lot of migration happened from the South to the West.
Okay.
Heather Cox Richardson talks about that in her book, How the South Won the Civil War, in terms of the ideological battle, the narrative battle, and also the kind of policy configuration battle. Like the West was similar to the South in the sense of economics. it was based on a lot of extractive industries, mining, kettling, and things like cattle ranching, kettling. That's not a word. But
Sounds like
it
kettle
led to a
corn.
similar type
You're
of
making me
politics.
hungry.
Exactly.
Sorry.
So post Civil War and post Reconstruction Southerners also felt deep, white people especially, not all, but like many of them, many of the elites felt deep economic anxiety and a collective humiliation. So what did they do? They implemented Jim Crow laws, right? Like that was and there was the 1898 Wilmington Rebellion or insurrection, where a black and white joint political party, the Fusion Party, was violently overturned. Their election victory was violently overturned, and that that was a precursor to January 6th, 2021, right? So, and race isn't the only factor, but it is there is a lot of truth to the saying that Donald Trump was the first white president after the first black president. And what does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
So the kind of cultural anxiety, or the sense of collective humiliation, is really important to understand. So that is what leads people to feel fear, disgust, and anger, and then to accept authoritarians who promise to deliver relief from those feelings.
So you're saying that authoritarianism and dictatorship is certainly an important facet of fascism, and that was maybe driven in response because of the first black president and kind of our historical context. Okay, can you go a little bit further in terms of how you see what's happening today fitting into this paradigm of fascism that we set forth?
Yeah, and a lot of it is dependent on economic anxieties related to what we might call as Christians who are reflecting on these times, like the decline of the American empire, right? I mean, there was a time during after World War II, where the U.S. was the great power. There was no manufacturing rival. It's pretty impossible to say that we wish the rest of the world would stay in that position. I mean, that would be really unkind. But there's something about our kind of collective experience and nostalgia that wants to return to that level of differential greatness, economic independence, and we want to be a creditor nation, an exporting nation, as opposed to a debtor nation and an importer. And the one of the first touch points to see like the discontent was NAFTA, and then the backlash when Ross Perot ran as a third party independent. Like, he was a billionaire who said, this trade deal is bad. It's bad for what we now call the Rust Belt. And so there's a lot of economic anxiety already present in that. We elevated finance. We took away capital controls so that capital just like fled the United States, but like foreign capital came in. We exported jobs overseas. So of course that decimates communities, and it also sets up other, our neighbors in other countries with really hard dynamics too, where they're going to be exploited by the oligarchs in their countries. So sure, there are patterns like that in a preliminary sense, and the response in fascist movements or authoritarian movements is to align elites, usually male, from the political, business, and religious classes into an alignment, implicit or explicit, and try to control power and do exactly what you had said before. Return the country to some kind of greatness, as opposed to, well, let's really think about both our internal dynamics and also the global scene and ask, is that even appropriate anymore? So,
okay. So I got a kind of a one-off question that might distract us, and maybe we won't go down that path. The idea of "Make America Great Again," are you saying that, well, that is it undefined? Like, when was it great? Previous, obviously, again, means it was great. Or are you saying, well, that could be defined as when we were the lone superpower after the fall of the Soviet enterprise?
I think that I think
Okay.
most people thought of the 1950s when
Okay.
they thought, when was America great? And
Okay.
it was when we felt like we were on the right side of history. So there's a
Yep.
moral greatness, but also an
Yep.
economic and political greatness. But
Okay.
also think there was there was just a lot of false nostalgia. So who was that great for? Was it great for women? Because women were on drugs heavily. I mean, they were
Mm.
medicating themselves because they had many women had just been out in the workforce during World War II, and now they're being sold a lifestyle, right? This is the 1950s tradwife image that the government was putting forward and
The
corporations
Leave
were
It to Cleaver, Leave It to Beaver image.
Yes, exactly. Like you should
Okay.
be happy just being a housewife and staying at home and not having a career outside the home. Meanwhile, you have all these uh, young and middle-aged men who came back from the war with massive PTSD and
Mm.
how do we deal with them?
Mm.
So the home was totally romanticized and women couldn't escape. They couldn't own a credit card or have a mortgage until what, 1974?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so they're financially trapped. I mean, some people have called marriage in that period a type of indentured servitude, and
Hmm.
and
Some people
you
think it's the golden age, though.
Yeah.
right,
Right.
exactly. And again, for who? What, was it
Right.
that for people of color? I mean, my parents were
Right.
just digging themselves out, or my dad's family was digging themselves out of World War II and being incarcerated as Japanese Americans, restarting the
Mm.
family business at Skid Row in Los Angeles. And was it great for them?
Wow. Wow. Uh,
I'm curious
mhm.
about one thing, because we talked about some of the racial components on this. One of the phenomena that was interesting in 2024 was the rise of support for Trump among minority groups. It was a fairly dramatic rise from previous two cycles. If there's a racial component to this, there's why do you think there was such a strong appeal in growing sectors of the minority communities?
That's a great question, Danny. I think most of the well, that can be broken down into different causes. Certainly the Democratic Party turning away during the Clinton years away from organized labor and to uh, suburban educated liberals, right, has a
Mm.
lot to do with it. So
Okay.
Trump was promising, and I understand, like in 2016, I was sympathetic. Like he was saying, we need jobs back. These trade deals have gone wrong, and there are class interests and economic interests that I think were there. That was reasonable. In 2024, I think his rhetoric about immigration and trade had increased,
Mm.
and he was very actively cultivating anger against immigrant communities.
Right.
And I have lived in immigrant communities, and that it is not monolithic in terms of views
Right.
of politics and immigration,
Right.
even because yes, um, there is tension, for example, between those who feel like we got here legally, and we're establishing ourselves and our families economically. And then there's all these newcomers. And then, even if they look like me and speak the same language, they
Yeah.
are likely to take my job or
Mm.
something like that. And Trump
Yeah.
tapped into that. And so I
It's,
think there's that.
Hmm.
you mentioned the word. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that perhaps class is more important category than race. Um, and there's the one of the things that's presented as the threat is quote unquote the elite, whoever those elites. You mentioned the shift in the Democratic Party from labor to educated elite, and I think there's also an element of that these class distinctions maybe were even exploited more than racial ones. The economic anxiety, losing my jobs, just the elites are in control. They're out of touch with us and the real. And I think Trump had
Hmm.
a way of really tapping into that too. It seems to me.
He did. And I think there was a lot of scapegoating going on. We talked a little
Yeah.
bit about that last time. I know. I think that was really unfair,
Hmm.
and I think the facts tend to support the notion that immigration is on net good for the United States,
Hmm.
and we do need to come alongside communities especially impacted by immigration. So I fully recognize that. But
Right.
but the I'm sorry, the idea that class is really important as a factor is very important.
Hmm.
And to some degree even fits, again, kind of a return to type, that race is a way of dividing the labor,
Hmm.
Mhm.
the uh, labor class, and kind of pitting people against one another. And so we've all seen that kind of that
Yep.
cartoon of the old rich white guy hoarding a lot of cookies, telling the white guy in the construction clothing, like, your problem is that guy, and it's like a black guy, who has no cookies, right? Like the
Mm.
construction guy has one cookie, and to say like your problem is that guy,
Mm.
that pretty much is what happened. And
Yeah.
so, I think that there was maybe, I don't know, Michael Lewis says he estimates it's like probably 20% of the country was really upset with Barack Obama being elected, and just like, had a very strong reaction to that.
Okay. Okay.
um, and so maybe for them it was race or some configuration of like nationhood, um, uh, probably Protestantism, Protestant evangelicalism, and what this guy looks like.
Mm.
But for others, it was complex. It was, I feel alienated from both parties. I feel like, if we continue to shake up the establishment, maybe good things will happen on the other side. But I think there's been a lot of questioning of that.
Hmm. Mako, one of the things that concerns me the most as I began even approaching this question, or just watching things transpire, even early in the beginning of Trump's second reign here, was the restrictions on free speech. I've always said that one of the things that makes America great, we can dispute whether it's great or not, is the freedom of speech. That we can say what we want and not have to worry about being Navalny in Russia, ending up in Siberia, dying somehow. We have that freedom of speech, and all of a sudden it seemed like the controls of freedom of speech were starting to get threatened. We're gonna police illegal protests. Well, like, you don't need to say you're going to police illegal protests. They're illegal. That's a veiled threat. And so when we talk about fascism, one of the things, it's the control of the media and control the propaganda, and then this authoritarianism. So you see someone like J.D. Vance. I think this is interesting, where all of a sudden he was this never Trumper guy, and all of a sudden now he's in. How do you explain? Can you speak kind of the both of those? I don't know if you want to bring your slides up or how you want to present, go
Yes,
through that.
I would love
Okay,
to bring them up.
I'll go ahead and flip this over here. There you go.
Great.
Okay, go ahead. Excellent.
So it's really significant that, I think and sorry,
You're good.
it it is really significant, I think, that he said Trump might be America's Hitler, before he became his running mate. And uh, and that disarms, or kind of, in my view, neutralizes the accusation of like, you're overreacting by calling Trump Hitler or comparing Trump to Hitler. It's like, look, I'm not the first.
Hmm.
um, and that's not even the real comparison point, right? Like, so, because again, who did the Nazis study? Who did they emulate? Jim Crow America. So the important point is
Wow.
Trump is actually using techniques that were designed in the segregated South,
Wow.
especially, that were political, economic, cultural, and institutional, in order to wield power to bring back what I would call plantation capitalism. right? So here are some other features of that, just to flesh that out.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
He doesn't want he doesn't want income taxes, right? In the 19 teens, we passed the what amendment in order to have a federal income tax. He wants he holds up McKinley and which is before the federal income tax, and he wants tax revenues to be regressive and to be based on tariffs. Now, I understand there's all kinds of even mixed messaging coming out of his administration as to why have tariffs. Does he want to bring back manufacturing? I don't know, but it's hard to read. But one thing is for sure, he passed his big beautiful tax cut for the wealthy. That it was just mind-boggling now how regressive our taxation is, and so that's one touch point. He also
How does
wants,
that relate, Mako, to a fascist tendency? Can you fill that in for me? That
yes.
this big beautiful bill is leaning towards fascism, and how so?
Well, I think if you deplete the middle class of discretionary wealth and also
Oh,
rest, you are exhausting them. They
okay.
don't have the time to be educated citizens because they're working, a full-time job plus they're Ubering on
Mm,
the side. So they're
mm,
similar things have been um, I, kind of felt in the Black community, right? Like this, the civil rights gains were
yeah,
based on the rise of a Black middle class.
right.
The flourishing of HBCUs were based on the flourishing of a Black middle class. If you deplete and exhaust the middle class,
Um,
then you drain them of the ability to launch civil rights organizations
interesting,
or to have discretionary wealth in order to give to
interesting.
nonprofits that are doing advocacy and policy work or community organizing. Does that make sense? I think
Yeah, yeah. We said in the last live stream, I think, in fact, that for a democracy to function well, you need an educated populace, because otherwise they're only voting based on what they know, which might be very, very little, or what the propaganda of the empire tells them, and that becomes very, very dangerous.
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
So, other features of this, the period between 1877 and uh, 1965 or 1964, 5, 8, if we want to call it that, is a lot of U.S. imperialism. We're
hmm,
running around the world grabbing land from Latin America and Asia
right.
in order to get a lot of natural resources. There's a return to fossil fuels, which is really hard because, there's all these data centers popping up that are driving up our electricity bill, our water bill, and
Yeah,
instead of investing in clean energy, which could complement, at the very least, our energy mix and help with fossil fuel use and bring down our energy bill, he is dismantling those things. So he's making us even more dependent on cronyism uh, and
mm,
and the fossil fuel companies and the corporations that he is in bed with. So there's there's that. There's also a return to forced labor and a kind of slavery on U.S. farms, which I have a slide about. I could get to that.
yeah. Go
So
ahead,
I'm happy to explore these things more if
please.
you would like.
Yeah, let's please do so.
Great.
Yeah,
So let me just back up a little bit and say, you know, that I mentioned, some of the factors in the U.S. South. So here are some resources
hmm,
for our audience if they're really interested in seeing, like, okay, what happened after the Civil War and Reconstruction in the South, culturally and politically? What kind of institutions were there? How did Black people and other poor white people get disenfranchised? And then in the West, there's explicit stuff. Hitler's American Model by James Whitman, and
yeah,
Hitler's Inspiration and Guide, the Native American Holocaust, how the South won the Civil War as it spread. So how America inspired the Third Reich. And this is the treatment of Mexicans under what's called Operation Wetback. And then what America taught the Nazis by Ira Katznelson. I mean, really important work. So
yeah.
I if people are uncomfortable by the comparison between Trump and Hitler, it's like, okay, well, what was Hitler emulating?
Okay. Early American.
An
Okay.
earlier period of
Excellent.
American history.
So it's not so much that you're comparing Trump to Hitler as much as you're saying we're reverting back to what we did during the Reconstruction era in American history, which was oppressing, elevating one society, one community, with the white class, especially the white male class, at the expense of Hispanics, Asians, blacks, people of color.
Yep. People outside our borders. And the important institutions to watch are the Heritage Foundation, the Manhattan Institute, those who really signed on hard to Project 2025, because it's all laid out there.
Yeah,
so,
the Heritage Foundation weren't they instrumental in 2025 in writing all that up?
Yep, absolutely. Russ Vogt is now OMB director and very influential in the administration. So I grouped your points, your 10 points, into political leadership, political identity formation, and and economic and judicial control. And I think one of the things that I think Trump did was play on the fear of immigrants. And here's this chart. I think it's put out by PRRI. And it says majority of white evangelicals believe immigrants threaten American values. And you could see here at the top, white evangelical Protestants have the greatest fear of immigrants for various reasons. And they break it down by race and religion. It's fascinating, this data. White evangelicals have, let's just say, a long history, and also institutions like Liberty University and its role in U.S. politics, right? Like how politicians on the Republican Party, you feel the need to go speak there, right, when they launch their campaigns. Why is that? So there's patterns, there's institutions, there's partnerships, there's donors, and there's money. And the way that these organizations function to hold up American exceptionalism, especially white evangelical exceptionalism, and then downplay everything else, or even say everything else is a threat to that, is a major problem. And everyone, in politics understands this is a major constituency. What do we do to either fan the flames and also get their money? Also, during Trump Part 1, 76% of white evangelical Protestants agreed with the refugee ban on Muslims. Okay, there's a data point. This article goes from February of 2017. Okay, so under political leadership, there's violence and militarism. And by the way, stop me if there.
No, you're good. Yeah.
We'll just interject what the things you mentioned, being anti-democratic and anti-liberal, authoritarian, and slide towards dictatorship.
Okay.
Past precedents. Mussolini's March on Rome in 1922 was successful. He took 25,000 black shirts and actually got himself appointed by the king prime minister. Hitler imitated that in Munich, fired a gun and said, the rebellion has started here, and Munich's government is now here. But he was caught and imprisoned for 5 years. But he was appointed. He got out and still led the Nazi Party, and got out in 1933. It was appointed chancellor in 1933. And it's interesting, right? He would do things like create a mythology. Like he honored Horace Bessel as a martyr. He was an early stormtrooper who lost his life. And Trump is kind of doing the same thing, creating a mythology around the insurrection of January 6th and honoring Ashley Babbitt as a martyr, as a hero of this, as true patriots. And so, again, it's a reversion to type. You want to look at the 1898 coup in Wilmington, North Carolina, and compare it to January 6th, 2021. These are Christian insurrections. And, here's some pictures of people carrying a cross, Jesus flags, the state of Israel. Of course, there's Christian Zionism represented there, and so on. And these are, also people who, it was studied, come from communities that are not that diverse, but are fearing diversity, right? In other words, if you actually live near people of color or work among them, then you actually have much favorable views of them. If you don't, but you fear them, then you're much more likely to actually go march on the Capitol.
I mean, can I jump in here just for a second on this,
Yes.
on the violence part? Because one of the arguments that you hear, and I think has some legitimacy, two things we've already brought up: the restrictions on free speech, and then now the issues of violence. And there'd
Yes.
be those to be quick to point out that those very same things also appear on the left. The left
Mhm.
has police on particularly on college campuses as police language for a long time. There's all kinds of language to restrictions on college campuses that are
Mhm.
generated and coming from the left. There is also political violence on the left. Um, People, BLM riots in 2020, those kinds of things. So when we break this down, one of the pushbacks is this is this is not unique to Trump and the right. There's also a movements like this on the left.
Right.
How do we deal with, how do we analyze all that?
I would say, does it come from the center or does it come from the periphery? Right. I mean, these labels that we use, right and left, I mean, we're stuck with them. But,
Mhm.
let's just say on the left. On the left, do these calls for violence come from within, like at the center of the party, from the core of the leadership of the party?
Mhm.
No, like Joe Biden was against defund the police as a slogan. He wanted to maybe make other reforms, but like
Mm.
he did not want to do that. Like no one in party leadership in the Democratic Party was calling for violence, and
Mm.
today no one does. However, when you have the leader of your party on the right calling for violence,
Mm.
and I understand, like, did Trump explicitly do that? I would argue yes. And even though most of his language is double entendre, right? So he always has some kind of plausible deniability himself. But
Mhm.
that's a whole nother thing. The issue is, no, the calls for political violence actually came from the center. And then when political violence actually erupted, he said nothing and did nothing in order to quell it. So, or at least he just watched TV for a few hours while all of this unfolded at the Capitol, if we want to look at January 6th. So, so I think that's my, first reaction,
Mm.
because,
Mhm.
and I think there is a qualitative and quantitative difference. So if I can move on, and then
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
I think Danny, we can come back to this question.
yeah.
Certainly, it's
Yeah.
always worth raising, and I
Yeah.
think we need to reject violence, but as Christians. But I think to observe this over time is interesting. So, here is a graph that says support for political violence over time. Now it's always hard to measure
Yeah.
belief in the necessity of political violence. I fully grant that.
Mm.
But it is quite high, higher among Republicans than it is for Democrats. Now, I have seen data that where Democrats have caught up, but again, under Trump Part 2. But again, it's for what, right? Is it to resist ICE arrests and things like that? Um,
Mhm.
okay, but here's where we get into very specific uses of political violence by political leaders. Mitt Romney said after 2021, after Jan 6, he had to hire private security for himself and his family at the cost of $5,000 a day.
Wow.
Yeah, and so did others. So Liz Cheney, had to pay private expenses. The reason is because Trump stokes what's called stochastic violence or random violence, which is, we know in the US, there's always going to be people with mental health issues or a particular kind of paranoia who will take their guns and attempt violence.
Mm.
I don't think we even know yet, like, how many attempts on Barack Obama's life was made. I don't think the Secret Service has released that data. So, but we know this happens, right? Like, it's just a statistical probability. And the use of rhetoric that fans stochastic violence and makes people feel like, hey, there's like crazy things going on, there's pedophiles in the other party,
Mhm.
unless it's substantiated. But what it does is it whips people into certain people in the population into a frenzy, and then people in the Republican Party are on record saying we were afraid to vote against Trump because what his followers would do. So a good example of this was the gentleman Craig Robertson in August of 2023, who fired his rifle at Air Force One as it passed over Utah, right, and was landing there because he announced that he wanted to assassinate Joe Biden. Now, why did he do that? It's because Trump told him that Biden is a Marxist, and he's coming for his wealth, and he's going to change America, right? And so here's some examples. In 2020, Trump says he's a radical Marxist enabler. So Biden, notice, right? Biden himself is not a Marxist, but he enables Marxists. Who's like who? Well, like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I mean, Bernie, sure, he wanted Medicare for all. Joe Biden, after he won in 2020, he never mentioned it again. So what do you mean? Like Joe Biden is a socialist or a Marxist? That is utterly false. So, and then in 2023, he was saying Biden is turning the executive branch into a Marxist equity enforcement squad. So it's like, what is this? And, talking about woke politics and language. And then in a speech in June 2023, Trump said he's at Moms for Liberty event. He was like, I'm going to take on the Marxist lunatics and perverts among the Democrats. So all this rhetoric of they're just coming for your guns, they're coming for your money, they're coming for your freedom, is what led Craig Robertson to not only threaten Joe Biden, but also Vice President Harris, Attorney General Merrick Garland, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, and I believe New York Attorney General Letitia Wright. Like, these were all people he wanted to assassinate. Furthermore, back in, I think this was 2024, there were Trump supporters who doxed Georgia grand jurors because they were involved in the voter fraud scheme. Or they were moving forward in the state trial. That's very dangerous because then all kinds of people will threaten those jurors. And then there was a Texas woman who threatened federal judge Tanya Chutkan, who is a Black woman. She left all kinds of racist threats and death threats on her phone, and she was later arrested. So that's the role of stoking stochastic violence. And then there's the role of organized violence, where police, for example, knew that the real threat at protests, including BLM protests, was not Antifa. It was the far right. It was the white nationalists. And yes, protests can be dangerous because anyone can sneak in there and disguise themselves as someone who's protesting the cause and instead wreak mayhem, right? And that is a dangerous setting. But overwhelmingly, BLM protests were peaceful. So the issue becomes in the public's mind, who's causing the violence. And so during the Washington, D.C. march of BLM protesters, when Trump crossed the road, used federal troops, and later Defense Secretary Mark Esper said, this is what he said. He said, can't you just shoot them in the legs or something?
Yeah. Shoot them in the knee, I think it was, right? Or maybe it was like, yeah.
So, first of all, using federal troops against U.S. citizens.
Right.
Secondly, shooting them for peacefully protesting, right? And so this is a scene of mounted troops throwing tear gas against peaceful protesters, all so that Trump could cross the street and take this photo. Now,
Mako, do you see what's happening, if I can interrupt really briefly, what's happening in the inner cities today, Portland, Chicago? Is this symptomatic of or emblematic of what you're talking about?
Yes, it is. And
Okay.
and can I, because I'm building to that.
Of course. Okay.
He's looking for a pretext to invoke the Insurrection Act.
Yeah.
So, and I'll get to what that is in just a minute. But when Kristi Noem goes to where was this? El Salvador, and poses.
I think it's El
This
Salvador,
is illegal. people need to consent, even prisoners, and they did not consent to this. And as we know, like most of the people shipped or flown with Abrego Garcia were actually innocent. They didn't have any criminal record. Yeah, I mean, this was ridiculous. So now it's in the House, right? This is organized political violence, and the lack of due process is something that I'll get to.
Okay.
And now, this was a graphic that I grabbed. Someone put it together, but it's a contrast. Eric Trump says, we're saving Christianity, we're saving God, we're saving the family unit, we're saving this nation. I mean, DEI is out of the window. Benny, you no longer have Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the national anthem and so on. But what are these moments when ICE arrests pastors or shoots them in the head for what? For peaceful protests. And this is where we've come. It is a reversion to type. We are now talking about a conflict between two different types of Christianity. That's arguably what U.S. history has been mostly about anyway.
What do you mean by that?
An argument between two different types of Christianity.
Yeah.
John Winthrop versus Roger Williams. An argument between two different types of Christianity. What is the role of Christian faith in public life? Abolition versus slavery. Women's rights versus not, right? Like, we're seeing all these things return. And
with violence, though.
With violence.
Okay.
And so,
which undermines, which just undermines the democratic process. And since,
absolutely.
Since some have power, they're the ones that ultimately win these conflicts, whatever side is in power. Okay.
Right. And to your concern about free speech, I mean, it's hard to speak if you feel like you're going to get beat up or killed, and that person is going to get pardoned. So there's other forms. I think there's evidence that even the treatment of immigrants on the H-2A visa and on farms. Yes, there's a lot of family farms that are going bankrupt because they no longer have people working because the labor people doing the labor were scared away. But at the same time, there are a lot of farmers who are actually millionaires and corporate farmers who really want basically human slavery to return, or some extreme forms of indentured servitude, because people on an H-2A visa doing farm work cannot organize. They have much fewer rights. They can be underpaid, mistreated, and then potentially deported if they raise a stink. So there's been a lot of questions about why is it that farmers voted against a lot of white farmers voted against apparently their interests. And yes, that is true in some cases, but I think others actually were voting for their interests. So that's something we may not have time to discuss, but I'm going to switch to the authoritarianism question, because here are all the constitutional principles that Trump is violating. He ignored the emoluments clause from day one. That's in Article 1. That helps.
The emoluments clause?
Bribes. Basically, it's bribes from other foreign leaders or
$400 million airplane from Qatar or wherever it was. Yeah.
Yep. He is not supposed to be able to receive those kinds of things. He ignored international law on refugees, which is in Article 2 of the Constitution, that international treaties take precedence, especially if they are ratified by Congress, which refugee law has been. He's violated birthright citizenship, or tried to, which is in the 14th Amendment. He's violated due process, which is in the 5th Amendment.
And that's all the immigration arrests, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Taking Congress's power of the purse from Article 1. Now, and Congress is not complaining. So he's using disbursements and withholding money in order to get favors or to get universities to bend the knee or things like that. He's threatening free speech and free assembly. That's in the First Amendment. Also using the power of the purse. He's defying or frustrating court oversight in 57 of 165 lawsuits that he has lost as of July 21st, 2025. And he's federalizing state national guards against governors. That was shocking. And he's placing U.S. military troops in blue cities. He is seeking a pretext for invoking the Insurrection Act. Why is that so scary? And this is probably Stephen Miller's play. He is especially cruel, I think. But what is the Insurrection Act? It is Thomas Jefferson's signature. Well, it got his signature in 1807, so that the president can define an insurrection and use federal troops against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. The president does not need to have judicial review. The Supreme Court has already waived that right, and there is no congressional check against it. So as soon as the president determines that there's an insurrection happening, he has unlimited authority. And for our viewers, I really encourage you to watch a YouTube video by Tad Sturmer, who's a professor of history. He does public history and resistance history. There's a video called Thomas Jefferson's Panic Button, the Insurrection Act of 1807. He goes into the 30 some odd uses of the Insurrection Act in U.S. history and what it meant. And there is a quote by Benjamin Franklin that starts, "Those who trade essential liberty for temporary security, ... And you can finish the quote or watch Star Wars. Yeah. So I think this is part of what he's going for. The anti-democratic, anti-liberal stuff can be seen in how much more Republicans are jumping to gerrymander their districts even more, their states even more. And so Texas is the most recent example. And the cost is, statistically, Black and Latino voters are the biggest losers, right? Because of the way that those districts are now drawn.
And Mako, right now the Supreme Court is hearing the hearing on the Voters' Rights Act. That's going to make that even more pronounced if they overturn that.
Yeah, that was just yesterday.
Yes, it's totally sobering. To your points about political identity, like the nationalism and the mythic identity, and also built on the scapegoating some kind of minority, that's been, I think, the most devastating when it comes to Christian witness, Christian love, because how are we loving our neighbors by doing this? So nationalism and mythic identity, this is what the Department of Homeland Security has put out on their social media. Like, what are these images? White people claiming the frontier, manifest destiny. What are these signaling? And this is saying, this is our heritage. This comes from the Heritage Foundation, this kind of rhetoric, because if you also see, like, being a heritage American, J.D. Vance uses that language, means that you can somehow trace your ancestry all the way back to before the Civil War. But what that means is, if you fought for slavery and for the Confederacy against the United States, you are just as deserving of being called an American as an immigrant who came after the Civil War, right? And might have a different melanin count in your skin, but who's more committed to democracy and upholding the rule of law than the Confederates were. So this is just terrible. And these are more recent ones. This is beautiful New England, and it says protect our sacred land. Like, wait, what? This is insane. This is, because talk about what the original settlers in New England did to Native Americans, and starting the Pequot War in order to enslave them. And you get this church steeple mixed in there. This is Christian nationalism. And this was just yesterday that I grabbed it after it was 3 minutes old, like a kids playing football in the yard. Trump looks at the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and says, like, I don't like this because it wants to talk about how bad slavery was.
Right.
Like, and he wants to somehow do away with that. And people can read this. But what is really interesting is he visited the same museum in 2017, and he said, actually, this is a really good museum. So what changed? Not the museum. So
I have some thoughts, but we don't have time. But yeah.
Well, so yeah, and the scapegoating and exclusion of
Okay.
especially brown folks and immigrants, I think he puts it forward as a national emergency. Like there's an emergency at the border. Really? Was there a national emergency in early 2024 when he told Republicans in Congress not to vote for Senator Langford's bipartisan
Right.
border bill?
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't do
That was a
both.
bipartisan bill that they had passed, right?
Yeah.
With
Yes.
bipartisan
Well,
support for
But he
immigration
wanted to
during the.
run on immigration and scapegoat immigrants,
Yeah,
and
that's
he
what it
didn't
looked
want to
like.
fix. He didn't want it fixed. It's been a political football. I understand. Yes,
Yep.
The both sides argument in this case, totally true. But like, but then don't say that it's a national emergency just as an excuse to grab more power.
Yeah. Just because
So
you wouldn't let the emergency go away 6 months earlier.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So the Springfield, Ohio case, I think is a really important example, and I
Yeah.
know probably Rob after this
Yep.
you may have to go, but the
Yeah, that's okay.
Trump and Vance both said the Haitian immigrants are eating cats and
Yeah.
dogs. The real history of Springfield is it used to be one of the most flourishing middle class suburbs, around. It was featured, I think, in one, was it Life magazine but anyway, from 2000 to 2014, it was number one for the percent of the middle class falling into poverty because of deindustrialization. Why?
Mhm.
Because Ohio and the federal government pursued tax cuts for the rich and allowed deregulated finance to ship jobs overseas. Now, there are some companies that still there, of course. They require 12-hour days. And so many Haitian immigrants and other people have no days. They work there and they have no days off.
Right.
There were more Haitian immigrants who came in 2021 because Haiti's president was assassinated and there was a surge in unrest, partly because of a long history of U.S. interference in Haiti, because the U.S. is never going to allow the Caribbean nations to have a lot of independence or even flourishing, because it would risk the New Orleans economy and the economy up and down the Mississippi River. We have wanted absolute control of that region. And so, but instead of telling that story, which would lead to a multiracial labor coalition, of course, Vance and Trump lies. They scapegoat immigrants. They say they invoke fear, disgust, and anger. They're eating cats and dogs.
Right.
I've had pastors defriend me on Facebook for correcting them on this issue.
Wow.
And there's a video by More Perfect Union, which is a progressive organization that studied this. It's called Deport Them All. Who's to blame for Springfield's immigrant crisis?
Yeah, it's actually a powerful documentary. It really is.
It's so good, and it gets at this.
Yeah.
So in any case, the fashioning, political leaders fashion then political identity for everyone else as you're either in or you're out, and we get to blame people for things that actually we caused in the past.
Right. Which is a lot of the South American thing. Danny and I have done a couple live streams in South America and Latin America, and the immigration crisis coming from those countries is a result of American interference in those countries. And we're working, by the way, for those of you guys who are watching, on getting a Venezuelan scholar to go, what's going on in Venezuela right now? Because it seems like the fact that it's the richest oil deposits in the world might be driving motivation for U.S. intervention in Venezuela. I mean, just saying. So,
yes.
And Mako, we can go a little bit further. I got to go to class here in just a little bit, but I know you got a lot more to present, and so my students will survive if I walk in 5 minutes early instead of 20 minutes early. So
great.
Okay.
Oh, well, I think we may have to revisit this topic.
Okay. Okay. That might work out. You want to do that then?
Yeah, I think it would be better.
Oh,
I have tons of questions too, so I think it'd be great to do a third part on this thing.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Rob,
I misunderstood you. So, whatever you'd like to do.
No, I said we can go about 10 more minutes if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay.
So I'll just say that control of media, education, and propaganda. The comparison to Germany is really interesting. There's what's called, there's this book by Thomas Howard, Protestant Theology and the Making of the Modern German University, where they had their own version of German exceptionalism and nationalists, even though they were technically what we would call liberal on scripture, but they converted Christian faith into secular ideas, like Christian faith is really the cultural advance of German culture, or Christian truth about humanity and the creation really is about German science and technology. So even though we would call those scholars liberal on scripture, I do wonder whether those who are white evangelical American exceptionalists are actually, we should call them liberal on scripture, because they're taking great liberties with scripture.
That's anathema, by the way, right?
It is, but this is the same thing that they did that we're doing here. And Trump sets up journalists to say Gulf of America if they don't, like the AP, that
they can't get access to the White House.
Exactly. He bullies universities like Columbia and Harvard, and then he bullies media companies who want merger privileges like Paramount and Disney.
Mako, I'm not sure if you heard that Rashid Khalidi, a professor at the University of Columbia, had to resign because of the certain restrictions now. He said he cannot teach his European Arab middle-aged European Arab history class because it's going to violate policies of the government, and he's fear of being arrested because of certain things he's no longer allowed to say.
Absolutely right. Then under the charge of anti-Semitism, probably. So critiquing Netanyahu and the regime of the state of Israel is suddenly anti-Semitism.
Exactly.
To the question of mass mobilization and uniformity, you have the Reichstag fire, which Hitler exploited in order to drum up a private police or a police force under his direct command, and he suspended civil liberties, and that became the Gestapo. So, whether the political right is using the Charlie Kirk assassination as this is a really important question. There were some MAGA supporters who explicitly said this is our Reichstag fire. Like, I thought your plot should be a little more hidden.
Miller also, in his speech at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, Danny, I think you sent me the video. Identified Charlie Kirk's death with who was the famed individual in the early Nazi history that the Nazis elevated as the martyr of the faith.
Got his name, but yes.
The Horace.
Something like and that's in the Charlie Kirk memorial by the 6-minute presentation by Stephen Miller, and it came right out of the Nazi playbook. It was like, I mean, it was crazy. It's like, what is this guy doing?
Right.
Yeah. It was there's a lot of parallels between what he said and what Miller said and what was happening in the early 30s.
Right.
In terms of the rhetoric.
And so it's developing a political police, right? ICE is kind of serving that function, and the FBI, Trump and Kash Patel are lowering the requirements to be an FBI agent, which are now starting to act more like a domestic federal police force or a political police force. And of course, the anti-Semitism threshold is changing. So you made the point that it's reactionary and revolutionary at once. And just a few days ago, Politico magazine
saw that one.
This article, and this is really interesting, of young Republicans saying things like, "I love Hitler," "I'm for violence," and so on. Economic and judicial control are really important. Hitler claimed he was serving without a salary, but the government gave a copy of Mein Kampf to every newly married couple. Jewish property was given to Nazi officers, which was perverse and gave rise to the golden pheasant term for certain officers, right? Like the more you're incentivized then to like seize property from Jewish people. And so compare that to Trump's meme coins, the Trump Bible, and so on. There's a lot of insider stock trading before tariff declarations. So the next FEC chair is going to have a field day. Just recently in August of this year, Rolling Stone says new analysis finds Trump family has ranked in $3.4 billion off the presidency. And then in September 1, the Trump family amasses $5 billion in a crypto coin launch, which is just insane. So
this is really troubling to me. To be honest with you, this is deeply troubling, because if you're motivated by wealth and power, and I think that's a fair concern, a question to raise. Has this administration been motivated by, and for me, and when we talk about the Gaza ceasefire, we have 2 live streams next Wednesday, and it's like, I don't think the ceasefire is going to go well when you have Jared Kushner negotiating the terms of the ceasefire deal, who has no understanding of Middle Eastern history or the people of the land, and he's motivated by, well, the Riviera on the Mediterranean. That is deeply, deeply troubling.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's all grift and gain.
Yeah.
And then, there are certain industries that are booming: private prisons, surveillance tech, AI, fossil
Yeah.
fuels, and border wall construction. So we're outpacing any other federal budget to the point. And so
Right.
it has not been, getting fraud, waste, and abuse out of the government. Actually, it has totally increased.
Right.
And that apparatus doesn't go, it wants to feed itself. And so, of course, Trump has changed the laws so that young criminals in Washington, D.C. are now, as young as 14, are now prosecuted as
Oh my
adults.
goodness. Wow.
So,
That's
so,
tragic.
so we are making, again, a carceral state. Is that not true of Jim Crow America?
Right. Yeah.
Now,
We are a carceral state. Let's be honest. We have
yes,
25% of the world's prisoners in American prisons and less than 5% of the world's population. And,
that's right.
and it's racialized. Let's be honest with that as well. Our
That's
prison
right.
system is racialized. Yeah.
And meanwhile, he's pardoning criminals like he pardoned a corporation that was
Right.
fined for breaking money laundering laws.
Right.
And then he pardoned a whole slate of criminals like Rod Blagojevich, or Andrew and
Yeah.
Tristan Tate. He didn't pardon them; he advocated for them. And then his treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell is just incredible for sex trafficking minors.
Mm-hmm.
How he's
Mehdi
treated,
Hassan had a big a
yes,
presentation on the idea of Trump as the most pro-criminal president. It was fascinating, his argumentation, and he
yes,
had 20 conservatives around him, and they were trying to argue against. It was an interesting endeavor.
yes.
Okay.
So, how he's handling the Epstein files, as well as
Yeah.
Eric Adams, Tom Homan, just kind of looking the other way in their case. And then it seems like drumming up false charges against Lisa Cook, Letitia James, Adam Schiff, and James Comey. So he
Right.
is weaponizing the Justice Department.
Yeah. That's
So
it.
in any case, to your point, what is fascism and why is it dangerous? Yeah, political leadership becomes authoritarian. The political identity, kind of the spiritual and emotional impact on us, as well as the degree of corruption of that people have to live with or bear with or even participate in and incur moral injury if they're going to try to be a productive member of society, is just insane. And then the economic and legal controls that Trump is exercising over all of us is unacceptable.
Wow.
So I know your question is are we on the way there? Your viewers, your viewers can make up their own mind. For me personally, I'm convinced we're already there.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are as well. Let me, if I can close maybe with this thought here. And I think, Mako, I shared this with you this morning when we were chatting. As Christians, we believe fundamentally that humanity is depraved and that there's this concern. We may be good, but we go towards evil. And of course, Paul says the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and many have wandered from the faith. We have to be careful of that. And one of the illustrations I use in my classroom is the Solomon story. Here the biblical story is looking for someone to choose wisdom. Adam and Eve failed to choose wisdom from God, but the wise man's like a tree that's nourished by streams of water, that yields its fruit in season. We're looking for that wise man, that person to choose wisdom. And Abraham and Sarah are given a choice, and Sarah took Hagar and gave Hagar. It's just repeating the serpent story in the garden story with Adam and Eve. And so you finally get to Solomon. Solomon is asleep like Adam was asleep. And Solomon chooses wisdom in his sleep and says, "Hey, God, you've given me." It's kind of really kind of arrogant if you make fun of the text, like you've been so good to my dad, and you gave him a son, and it's me. Wow, how lucky and how blessed I am to be that son, and you've given me power to rule over all these people. But I'm like a child. I don't know good and evil. And it's quoting Genesis, the tree of good and evil. I don't know good and evil, how to come in, how to go out, how to rule over these people. So give me wisdom. It's like finally somebody realizes that the source of wisdom is God himself. That's the goal of the biblical text. And then you read the next part of the story. And of course, Solomon becomes massively wealthy. And a lot of Christians read this, especially the prosperity theologians, and say, see, if you choose wisdom from God, prosperity is yours. But if you know the text well, you know that Solomon is not being portrayed well. It says at the beginning of 1 Kings 3 that he went to the high places. You're like, okay, there's a problem here. He's going to the high places where he ought not to go. And then, of course, you compare that with the book of Deuteronomy. The king cannot marry foreign wives. The king cannot amass more than one wife. Polygamy was actually outlawed for the king. And then it says, and he cannot have stalls for horses and chariots. And 1 Kings 4 says he had 40,000 chariots and 40,000 horses. And his meal like one day was 10 oxen. It's like this lavish wealth. And if you know the story, he enslaves 1 out of every 12 tribes every single month of the year to pay for the king of Tyre for his debt. So he's enslaving his own people. So what happened with Solomon? He got wisdom, but he had power. And when you merge wisdom and power together, that's dangerous. So, Danny and I, ordained ministers, we would say, look, no minister should have the supreme power in the church. They're godly men and women. They're trying to do God's work. But the danger of power is so present that you have to have checks and balances on them. How much more a secular entity like the government or whatever? We have to have checks and balances. So even if you think Trump is good, I like his policies, I didn't like Biden, the reality is what we're saying is, yeah, but when you unleash power, even a good person can become intensely corrupt and bring great danger and damage to everybody else. And that's why we framed this conversation at the beginning with our goal is to love our neighbor as ourselves. And okay, some immigrants are illegal, but throwing them in cages and dehumanizing them and separating families and shipping people just because they spoke up against the government, that's un-American, un-Christian, and something that we need to speak up against. So, all right. Danny, have any last thoughts here?
We need a whole nother session.
Yeah, we may have. So let's process this, and we'll see if we get any comments in the Facebook feed or YouTube feed, Danny, and we'll process that.
I think I would love to have a follow-up session in which we actually talk about, okay, so what do we do? What do we
very good.
If any and all of this is actually coming to pass, where's the church in this? What is the church's role in this?
Yeah.
And I think that's a bigger question to me.
Excellent.
What is the prophetic role of the church versus complicity look like? I think for us as pastors and leaders, that is the larger question that we still have not addressed.
Absolutely. Good point.
I wouldn't mind having that conversation.
Excellent. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the Determined Truth YouTube page, and then send us your questions. Make comments there. Maybe Danny and I can go through those as well, and maybe we can kind of fertilize the conversation if Mako's willing to do it again. He's always so gracious. So thank you so much, Mako, for all your time. Thanks, Danny, for everything as well.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.